Hi and welcome to Board Geek Girl. I'm Carly and this is Board Games 101. In the first episode we looked at gateway games and party games. If you've not seen that episode then I'll put the link up here and I'll also link it in the description below so you can go check that out before continuing with the rest of this video. We're going to be taking a look at abstract games, strategy games and thematic games. So let's get into it. So what are abstract games? You've probably heard of the most famous one of all, chess. Abstract games don't tell a story, they don't have a theme, and any kind of theme and artwork they do have is just purely there to make the game more visually appealing. It doesn't actually do anything to enhance the mechanics of the game or the storyline of the game. If you think of games like chess or checkers, mechanics of the game are very simple. You are simply moving your pieces across a board following certain placement rules, but generally it's very straightforward kind of movements. The difficulty comes from the strategy and knowing when to make your moves. Most abstracts follow this idea of simple mechanics with a deeper strategic thinking. There's no hidden information in abstract games. Everything is out on the table for all players to see. The only secret is not knowing what your other players are going to do. You can usually try to deduce this, and knowing what the other player's best move for them could be, then you can plan your move around that. If they don't take the best move available to them, then more the better for you. There's usually very little luck and very little randomization, little to none at all in abstract games. This usually means you don't find many dice or cards because these add randomization and luck elements to games. Abstract games are generally competitive and a bit of a battle of wits. Using chess again as an example, you are competing against one another, working to remove each other's pieces from the board and ultimately gaining the upper hand. Azul is a beautiful 2 to 4 player abstract game where you are competing against one another to tile a wall. Pretty abstract. You take tiles from the center and place them onto your own wall. Any that you cannot place, that you are forced to take, become negative points as dropped tiles. The game is mostly solitaire, just working on your own player board, but there are some pretty tense and funny moments if another player is forced to pick up, say, 8 tiles that they can't possibly play. It's funny if it's not happening to you, at least. Azul is a really simple and relaxed game. One I would recommend for beginners, as the components are just so beautiful, it really draws everyone in. In Sagrada, you are competing to complete a stained glass window, filling them with dice, whilst following certain placement rules again. I know what you're thinking, dice in an abstract game? Well, Sagrada is a great example of an exception that proves the rule. There are loads of dice in Sagrada, and dice are the king of randomization. But play the game well, and this randomization shouldn't set you back too far. There is also technically a hidden information element in this game in the form of private objectives. But these objectives can be easily deduced by the other players, and they don't really affect the other players too much, they just affect you in your end game scoring. Of all the games on this list, Santorini is the closest to chess, which would explain why I'm so bad at it. It plays best with 2 players competing to build up the beautiful 3D island of Santorini. It has these beautiful 3D building components, and you are building your buildings and moving your little pawns around, trying to get your pawn to the top of a building first to win the game. It really has that competitive edge like you get with chess, that player v player kind of thing. You're not just trying to beat your opponent, but you are actively trying to set them back whilst advancing yourself. Another stunning game is photosynthesis, which plays well with 2 to 4 players. In photosynthesis, you are planting trees and taking them through their life cycle in the forest. It has amazing 3D components which play really well into the mechanics of the game. When the sun moves around the board, any trees that are in the shadow of other trees don't get photosynthesized, and therefore they don't score points. You really need to plan multiple steps ahead in this game, deciding when to plant trees, when to increase their size, and also when to cut them down. Some strategy games are referred to as Euro games. This is due to Germany really producing the first heavy, thinky strategy board games, and they became Euro games. Euro games is still a term that is widely used, but strategic board game is a little bit easier to understand, so we're going to be using that for this video. So to state the obvious, strategic board games are strategic. A player's decision-making skills have a high significance on the outcome of the game. Strategic games have a definite theme, however the theme most often has very little to do with the gameplay. The focus instead is on the mechanics. For example, a game set in a sci-fi universe would play exactly the same way as a game set in medieval times. Player conflict is indirect and usually just involves competition over resources or points. Combat is quite rare. Players are never eliminated from the game, and if you've ever played Monopoly, you probably know that player elimination is not a lot of fun. Like abstract games, there's very little randomness or luck in strategy games. Any randomness there is mitigated by having the player decide what to do after a random event happens rather than before. Dice are rare, but not unheard of. Star Realms and Hero Realms are a great example of how the theme doesn't always matter so much in strategic board games. Star Realms, on one hand, is set in a sci-fi universe, and Hero Realms is set in a medieval fantasy universe, yet they play exactly the same, the rules are the same, and the actions are the same. You will be working to build up your decks and upgrade your cards. You'll be attacking one another, defending yourself, and healing yourself. That's it. Basically, it comes down to, would you prefer to play the game in a sci-fi universe or a medieval fantasy universe? They're really great games, which I highly recommend, but I'm actually going to go into more details on them in one of my future videos later on in the series when I talk about deck builders as a whole. Pandemic is a great game, and it's actually the game that got me started in board games. It's a cooperative game where you take on the role of various scientists and medics and such, and you travel around the world trying to prevent the spread of disease and also trying to find a cure, or for to be precise. Well, it's a really great theme. They have actually also brought out other versions of Pandemic, such as the Cthulhu Pandemic. I'm not sure how Cthulhu created a pandemic, but he did. So there's that. These versions change the theme somewhat, but the mechanics largely remain the same. I always recommend co-op games for beginners because they're really great at just leveling the playing field between players, and if you or someone you know is a bit of a sore loser or a sore winner, co-ops help eliminate those issues for you because you are playing against the game rather than each other. For something a little meatier, Scythe and Dinosaur Island are two great medium to heavy board games. They can look a little overwhelming at first due to there being so many parts and pieces to keep track of, but if you have a little patience and you're willing to learn the rules, take your time, after a couple of rounds it all kind of just falls into place. Both games are really well designed to be intuitive, and they guide you through the various stages of the game. Rodney at Watch It Played has actually done 2 great videos on those games. I'll put links in the descriptions below, because that's always a great way to get a really good feel of the game, is to see it being played and see it being explained in depth. I'm not going to do that because Rodney's got that covered. Scythe is an area control game where you play as different factions which have their own unique powers, and You were trying to gain the most influence and power over 1920s Europa, which is kind of an alternate reality where large mechs roam around war-torn continents. The art and general quality of the game is stunning. Probably my favourite art in a board game, and I would highly recommend. Dinosaur Island is Jurassic Park in a board game. You are building a dinosaur theme park, trying to make DNA, to make dinosaurs, make enclosures to keep them in, and attractions to entertain your visitors. But if you don't keep your security level in line with the threat level of all those dinosaurs that you have made, you risk them escaping and eating some of those visitors, which is not ideal. It has really stunning artwork, not necessarily for everyone. It's pretty bright, and there are adorable dinosaur meeples, and everyone loves dino meeples. Thematic games are sometimes referred to as Ameritrash games, which is kind of a comparison to Euro games. Where Euro games originated in Europe and were highly strategic, Ameritrash was the nickname given to less strategic games coming out of America. Personally, I find the term to be a little derogatory and negative, so I prefer the term thematic, especially since not all thematic games come out of the US, and they're certainly not all trash. Thematic games, in comparison to strategy games, are heavily themed. They have a really strong focus on the story. Usually players take on quite deep roles in characters, heroes or factions with individually defined abilities. Miniature games make up a large portion of thematic games as well and add to the immersive nature of them. Although you can get thematic co-op games, the competitive ones often feature very heavy player interaction and conflict. As a counter to abstract and strategic games, thematic games usually feature a moderate to high level of luck and randomization. This makes them a great equalizer though, as for new gamers they're just less strategic and you're putting a little bit more of your fate into the dice and so on. They are great for drawing in new gamers because there is a wide range of IPs available, such as Star Wars, Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead. Any fandom out there has some sort of board game. There's even a WWE board game. I'm not sure we need to talk about that. In case you're wondering what WWE stands for, it stands for Walk with Elias. Dead of Winter is a zombie apocalypse game of survival and betrayal. It's a semi-co-op, which basically means you are all playing together as a group against the game, or one of you could be a traitor with hidden objectives, which go against the group's goal in general. The game really captures the struggle of survival and throws some tough choices at you in the form of crossroads cards. These are kind of like choose your own adventure cards. They give you multiple options. You have to make a choice, often choosing the lesser of two evils, unless you're evil, in which case you will choose the evilest of two evils. I'd personally recommend Dead of Winter The Long Night over the original. It's a standalone expansion, so you can mix the two together, which is what we've done because we already had the Dead of Winter. But if you were buying it now, with both available, I would choose The Long Night. It just adds a little bit more gameplay with some new modules, so if you get a bit bored of the base game, you've got those to throw in as well. Star Wars is a big IP in board games and is licensed by one of the best publishers out there, Fantasy Flight Games. There are hundreds of Star Wars games, so if you're a fan, you'll definitely find one that you like. There's even a Star Wars Carcassonne. I'm not sure how that plays. Imperial Assault is a one versus all game, where one player controls the Galactic Empire and all the other players take on roles within the Rebel Alliance. It's a campaign game, meaning that you play one mission and that story then follows on into the next one and so on. The theme and the story play a really big role in this game. There are awesome minis and modular boards to create different maps for each mission. The asymmetry of one versus all is great, especially if you have that one friend who thinks they're smarter than everyone else at the table. Put them in the one versus all role and just see how good they are. Mansions of Madness 2nd edition is a fully cooperative, app-driven board game. Takes place in the H.P. Lovecraft universe. Thanks to the app, it's deeply immersive, and you discover the buildings and towns as you explore around. There are various villains and monsters to face, and there's a really great narrative. It will not only give you goals to reach, it will also tell a great story throughout the campaign. This is another great production from Fantasy Flight. The horror theme is done really well. There's a whole load of miniatures in the game, and again more modular tiles, so you get loads of different variations on where you can explore. But make sure to get the 2nd edition. The 2nd edition is the one that is app driven. If you get the 1st edition, you have to have one person as kind of games master who puts out the maps and everything. It's much better to just leave that to the app to do, and everyone can get involved in the story and get fully immersed. Detective is a cooperative story-driven board game. You're playing as detectives for a new agency called Antares, which uses advanced technology to help solve crimes. Game is played over 5 cases, which all kind of link together with a plotline which will be unravelled as you progress through the cases. You have to manage your time and make sure you are following the right leads, choosing which ones are dead ends. Whilst the story is incredibly deep and intricate, the actual gameplay is very simple. There are so few rules, sometimes it doesn't even feel like you're playing a game. I personally found Detective to be one of the most engaging and rewarding gaming experiences to date. I loved the true crime genre, and this game really feels like a part of that. The stories are based on true events, and it even encourages you at times to break the fourth wall by googling certain things that the game tells you to look up. That's kind of general knowledge, because the game is all kind of based in our own history. It's one of the lengthier games out there. Each session will take about 3 to 4 hours, but if you're looking for a really great activity to do of an evening or an afternoon on a Sunday, then this game is great. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video somewhat informative. Maybe it's given you a few ideas for games to take a look at. I want to just kind of stress that when you're first starting out in board games, it's really important to do your research. Ask around to folks on social media who like games that you like, read reviews, watch videos, skim through rulebooks online before you make a purchase. If you impulse buy, you are going to end up with a lot of board games. Trust me. The rest of the series, I'm going to be diving deeper into the various board game mechanisms such as deck building or cooperative games. I'll be discussing what they are, why they might work well for you, and where to start with some game recommendations in those categories. So if that sounds like something you would be interested in, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up just so I know to keep making more. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you soon.